In this video, we will look at both a preference ballot and a preference schedule. So our definition here for a preference ballot is a ballot in which the voter ranks the choices in order of preference. It's kind of like a no-duh definition. It's like, oh yeah, that's kind of what it sounds like. So instead of just picking your number one, you actually have to look at all of the candidates and decide which one you prefer in what ranking. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. The first one is a House of Representatives ballot paper from Australia, where they're actually using this system. So in this election, they are asked to number the boxes from 1 to 8 in the order of their choices. And then you can see the candidate's name: Rebecca O'Brien, Marriage Equality Party; Jessica Traeger, the Darren Hinch's Justice Party; Kelly O'Dwyer, Liberal Party. Maybe some of these parties sound familiar, some don't, but again, this is Australia. Jason Ball, the Greens Party, and so on. And so the voter is to rank them. Let's say I like, I'm just going to make this up, I like Nancy Bassett as my number one. Maybe I like Kelly O'Dwyer as number two, and then number three. And I would just fill out the ballot in order of my favorite preferences. Then I might pause and go like, wow, who do I dislike the most? I really don't like Robert Kennedy. I'll put him number 8. I'm just making these up. I actually don't know these people at all. So if you're from Australia, don't take offense to this. And then I would just finish the ballot by filling out my preferences there, all the way up to 8. So let's see. I want to put a 5 there, maybe a 6 here, and a 7 there, and then that's what I would submit. So we're going to try this as a class. I'm going to provide a link to you. And the question for our class will be, and actually I'll combine this with both of my Math 45 sections. What type of vehicle would you like to drive for the next 5 years? I will be showing you the results of these polls in class. So this is just made from Google, like a Google poll. And so you're going to think about which one of these vehicles would I really like? Maybe what's my first choice, second choice, third choice, fourth choice? If these are the only 4 brands I get to choose from: Chevrolet, Ford, Toyota, Honda. I realize there's more brands, but just for simplicity, we're going to try this just from these 4. And so we will see the class results. Now, what's different about this kind of voting than what would happen in a real election is this is just an interest poll. What type of car do you want to drive? Imagine if the results of this poll dictated what you actually had to do for the next 5 years. Let's say the class ended up voting on Ford. Well, if you're a Ford lover, that's great. You get to drive a Ford for the next 5 years. If you dislike Ford, and maybe you liked Honda, for example, you would be very unhappy with that. And that's kind of what happens with political voting, right? You have to kind of live with the next few years of the outcome of the vote. So then we're going to look at something called a preference schedule. Now that you see what a preference ballot is, the preference schedule is, here's the definition: the individual preference ballots are combined or tallied, right? They're counted into one preference schedule. The schedule shows you all of the results of the vote. Okay, and it's going to show the number of voters in the top row that voted, there's a little typo right there, that voted for each option. So here's an example of something I just made up completely from the Australian candidates I read above. You might see those names look familiar from the ballot I showed you above. So and the way that we're reading this, I'll just look at the first column. In the first column, there were 42 individual voters that ranked the candidates in this order. They thought Ball was number 1, Traeger was number 2, O'Brien was number 3, Kennedy was number 4, and so on. All right. And then there were 65 individual voters that ranked them in this way. And then there's 17 voters that ranked the candidates this way, and so on, all the way to the end of the table. We have all of these voters. So one thing to think about about a preference schedule is that it shows you the number of voters, but it may not give you the total number of voters. And that's pretty easy to find out just by taking those numbers across the top of the schedule and then adding those up. I have a calculator here. I'm going to do it very quickly. 42 plus 65 plus 17 plus 112 plus 33 plus 51 plus 39 is equal to 359 total voters. All right. Now that might be important if we're trying to think of like who got what percentage of the vote. So when you look at this kind of schedule, one thing that should come to mind is like, wow, how do I decide who won? And maybe you're thinking like, well, right here's my biggest number, right? When I have this 112 is the biggest number, and that means O'Dwyer wins. Well, that's not necessarily the case for a number of reasons. Number one, 112 is not even half of 359. So that's less than half of the people. And the other thing to consider is, how does O'Dwyer rank in the other columns? Well, Ojwire ranks 5th in the first column, last in the second column, 6th. Of course, first in the column we're looking at, 6th here, and then 5th here and 5th here. And so should that be our overall winner? Well, a preference schedule like this allows you to count the vote in a variety of ways, and that is precisely what we're going to be looking at on the next few pages.